He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No, no, no, other than day one." In 2016, I declared, "I am your voice." Today, I add, "I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution."
Donald Trump is back, and more radical than ever. A reactionary wind is blowing through the U.S., and it's gathering strength.
And breaking news tonight, the deadly siege on Congress as an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol.
Extremists attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And in October 2023, House Speaker Mike Johnson told Congress this.
The Bible is very clear that God is the one that raises up those in authority. He raised up each of you, all of us.
The Supreme Court is also overturning long-standing precedents, like the right to abortion.
My body, my choice! My body, my choice!
The radical right's triumph is the result of more than 40 years of strategy, and it was set in motion by a minority striving for power.
Lawyers Division Director of the Federalist Society.
Certainly a story of revanche, and revenge, I think, is quite accurate.
The hard right are defending their idea of the American dream. And they're prepared to plunge the country into chaos by destabilizing its democracy to realize it.
It's not too much of an exaggeration to say that the radical wing of the Republican Party has become nihilist. They want to bring the system down.
I do think that we're in the middle of a cold civil war. It's an open question on what vision of the world will ultimately prevail.
How did this ultra-right minority manage to conquer the political stage? How did they help Donald Trump return to power? And in this deeply divided society, how far will they go now to achieve their goals?
There's two ways to think of him, the Trump presidency. One is that he is a cause and he's the one changing the party. The second is to understand Trump as a product of long-standing changes that have been building over the decades. And if you don't look at the previous 3 decades, it doesn't really make sense. It comes out of nowhere.
It's hard to find a turning point. I mean, the real radical, the party does begin to radicalize some would start with Reagan, but in terms of its behavior, the kind of norm-breaking behavior begins with Gingrich.
Newt Gingrich, who paved the way for the party's radicalization, is one of the most prominent conservatives in American politics. His influence on the Republican Party began in the early 1980s under Ronald Reagan.
1980, Newt Gingrich is a young congressman just finishing his first term. He was elected in Georgia, and he's very enamored with Reagan, and he's listening to Reagan. He found Reagan's argument about the country very appealing.
It's morning again in America.
Reagan's vision of America sparked a conservative revolution. Its motto, "Government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem." Reagan asserted that prosperity could be just around the corner if it's built with faith and family and freed from tax burdens.
This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future.
Still, the promised revolution didn't go far enough for the likes of Newt Gingrich. Feeling that the state still held too much power, he broke with Reaganite optimism.
Playing with fear is essential from the start of this Republican revolution, and Gingrich does this all the time. He's not playing always to the hopes of the country, as Ronald Reagan liked to do. He's trying to paint a much bleaker picture.
We read today about horrors that we would not have tolerated a generation ago. We put back on the street people who are brutal, vicious predators who we would not have allowed on the street a generation ago. In Georgia, the governor can build golf courses, but he can't find the money to open prisons. Across this country, we're told there's always more money for the politician's pork barrel, but there's not enough money to keep the predators off the street.
Gingrich pioneers this idea of conservative populism that becomes very important to Donald Trump.
The blood-soaked streets of our once great cities are cesspools of violent crimes. Now we are a nation in decline. We are a failing nation.
And that is a model that Donald Trump embraces from the moment he starts running for office, and it comes directly out of that Gingrich playbooks.
Gingrich was one of the first, maybe the first national politician who realized that engaging in much more aggressive, hard-hitting partisan behavior was politically useful, and that taking off the gloves and playing dirty was, in fact, politically successful, politically rewarding.
To reap these rewards, he trashed political etiquette and any sense of courtesy that existed between Republicans and Democrats. In 1990, Gingrich endorsed a memo sent to GOP members running for Congress. It provided down-and-dirty guidelines for a new kind of political fight.
The words and phrases are powerful. Read them, memorize as many as possible, and remember that, like any tool, these words will not help if they are not used.
The language of political discourse began to mimic war rhetoric.
Gingrich circulated a list of ways to talk about the opposition, right? To talk about Democrats and others that they were targeting. It included language like traitors, corrupt, even some kind of animalistic language. So it's very much a new style of politics that not only refuses compromise and relies on brinkmanship, but also demonizes the opposition.
What distinguished Gingrich from prior leaders is his intolerance for people who did not agree, and his determination to use all means necessary to destroy the opposition in his party and among the Democrats. He was extreme.
But Newt Gingrich had begun making his mark on U.S. politics even before that. Starting in the late 1970s, debates in the House of Representatives were filmed and broadcast right into Americans' living rooms.
On this historic day, the House of Representatives opens its proceedings for the first time to televised coverage. The marriage of this medium and our open debate has the potential, Mr. Speaker, to revitalize representative democracy.
Gentleman from Indiana.
Newt Gingrich and a small group of like-minded Republicans, and they go on the floor every day, and they start to make these speeches which catch all of Washington by surprise. They argue Democrats are not protecting the national security of the country. Democrats refuse to fight communism. Democrats essentially are putting us all in jeopardy.
Every time a communist movement battles an authoritarian U.S. ally, Democrats with radical views believe the promises of the movement. Every time a communist movement takes power, Democratic congressmen say it will be fair, progressive, enlightened.
And the problem was, if you're watching C-SPAN, all you could see is the person speaking. What you couldn't see was the chamber was empty.
Believe the promises of the movement.
So Democrats are furious because he was castigating and impugning their patriotism, and they weren't even there to respond.
The gentleman said he was willing to engage in debate. Now, he's willing to engage in debate when the members are not here.
My personal opinion is this. You deliberately stood in that well before an emptied house and challenged these people, and you challenged their Americanism. And it's the lowest thing that I've ever seen in my 32 years in Congress.
Most Republican leaders looked at him and said, he's crazy. That's just bad politics. And it was not until he ascended to the leadership and tried these strategies out that Republicans realized, okay, he's onto something. What he's trying is actually working. The base likes him.
Newt Gingrich laid one of the cornerstones for the radicalization of the right, and his aggressive methods bore fruit. In 1994, during Bill Clinton's presidency, Gingrich led the Republicans to victory in the midterm elections. For the first time in 40 years, the GOP gained control of both the House and the Senate.
Now.
Their strategy of sowing division and manipulating public opinion paid off.
I think what's happening is different. It's not a Republican victory. It's not a Democratic victory. It is the American people making a set of choices.
In the 1980s and 90s, Newt Gingrich laid the groundwork for his Republican revolution in American politics. At the same time, another offensive was targeting the judiciary. The aim, to weaponize the courts, including the powerful U.S. Supreme Court.
Big breaking story here within the past hour. The U.S. Supreme Court has decided to overturn Roe v. Wade in a 5-4 vote.
It is a major decision that will change laws across our country and impact women's access to reproductive care.
In 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the federal constitutional right to abortion. The decision restricted bodily autonomy. The 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling was overturned by 9 judges appointed for life terms.
It's hard to really conceive how powerful our Supreme Court really is. A president is for 4 or 8 years. Supreme Court justices for life. And what has really differentiated the right from the left is seeing the courts as just another battleground for political fighting.
This political battle began in the 1980s and was largely orchestrated by the Federalist Society, a conservative and libertarian organization.
The Federalist Society was founded in the early 80s by law students at Yale and the University of Chicago Law School. But really, it was incubated inside the Justice Department of the Reagan administration.
If you grew up in a conservative religious household and then suddenly you came onto an American campus in the 1980s, you had activist groups pushing for women's rights. You had activist groups pushing for lesbian and gay rights. And to people who came from a very conservative background, think of people who are teenagers, maybe in their early 20s, that felt very, very threatening.
Units in society, it's not an either or.
Most of the students are liberal, but I believe that their ideas can be changed. They're simply mimicking what they've learned. They don't know why they believe what they do.
The Federalist Society was designed to try to fill that need, to develop a discussion of conservative ideas about law.
So for the Federalist Society and the legal organizations, they saw this as being a way of tracking the most promising young conservatives in the legal movement, in the law schools, putting them in contact with the people who could offer them the right stepping stones. That is, the right lower court clerkship, the right recommendations, the right law firms to work at, that ultimately they could get into Supreme Court clerkships.
Well, I am very pleased to announce that I will nominate Judge Clarence Thomas to serve as Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
10 years after its founding, George Bush Sr. appointed a member of the Federalist Society to the Supreme Court for the first time. The Society's power was further strengthened by this man.
Good afternoon. My name is Leonard Leo, and I am National Lawyers Division Director of this Federalist Society.
One of the most effective, I guess you would say, cork in this effort to transform the courts is a man named Leonard Leo.
Leonard Leo is somebody who's a very conservative man, a very conservative Catholic, again, like a lot of people in the Federalist Society.
The organization's vice president, Leonard Leo, devoted the next quarter of a century to making the courts more conservative. But it was his connection to Donald Trump that turbocharged this process, leading to a triumph of right-wing ideology at the Supreme Court.
He was actually the key person who developed the list of judges that were presented to Donald Trump to win over the religious right and say these are the kind of judges that we will put in.
Supreme Court judge. So, as you know, I have a list of 20. I've gone through them. We've met with numerous candidates. They're outstanding in every case. They were largely recommended and highly recommended by Federalist Society.
And so one way that religious conservatives cut a deal essentially with Trump is they got him to agree to appoint to the U.S. Supreme Court only potential justices who were approved by conservative leaders led by Leonard Leo.
Trump got the support of the religious right on the ballot. Evangelicals make up around 1/4 of the U.S. population, and in 2016 they voted overwhelmingly for Trump. And he kept his promise. All 3 of his appointed judges to the Supreme Court had ties to the Federalist Society. And since they're all quite young, the court will lean conservative for decades to come. In June 2023, 1 year after ending the constitutional right to abortion, the U.S. Supreme Court also declared affirmative action to be unconstitutional. Some fear marriage equality could be next. The reversal of previous progressive rulings may have only just begun.
The Trump judiciary is the Federalist Society by another name. So actually, I think what's more dangerous and what I think ultimately they would say is their greater successes are the cases that are coming up.
The ultra-right has managed to seize control over the judiciary. But to set the tone within the Republican Party itself and assure their continued ascent, they also needed an army of voters, activists, and members of Congress. In 2008, the Tea Party movement gave them that.
The Tea Party really was the first major manifestation of the Republican Party's radicalization into an anti-system force. And it really began the bottom-up transformation of the Republican Party into what is now Trumpism. These were the foot soldiers of MAGA.
The movement began with protests against the Obama administration's bailouts for U.S. banks and homeowners struggling during the financial crisis. Some GOP supporters rejected these measures as anti-American socialism.
It was a set of protests against Obama that initially was framed in terms of opposition to his economic policies and to taxes. And what really united them was hatred for Obama and fear for a loss of status.
Is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible? Tonight is your answer. It's the answer spoken by young and old, rich and poor, Democrat and Republican, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, gay, straight, disabled and not disabled states. We are and always will be the United States of America.
I cannot stress enough how massive a change it is, how unprecedented it is for an ethnic group, in this case, white Christians, and that sat on top of every social, political, cultural hierarchy in the United States for 200 years, to suddenly, within a generation, be faced with the disruption, first of all, the loss of their electoral majority, and the disruption of those social hierarchies. So for the Tea Party, this is a perception of an existential threat. I'm losing my country. That's enough to get people out of bed on a Saturday morning.
The Tea Party movement had tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of citizens taking to the streets for close to 2 years. But the populist revolt only really strengthened after it started receiving support from powerful sponsors. with their own political agenda.
They received a lot of funding from billionaires. Libertarian, anti-tax, anti-regulation billionaires who thought they were funding a libertarian anti-tax army.
Among the most generous donors to the movement were the Koch brothers, right-wing libertarian billionaires and owners of multinational conglomerate Koch Industries, which is active in the oil and chemical sectors. Over the years, they've built up and financed an unprecedented network of more than 100 foundations, including the Americans for Prosperity.
What a thrill it is for me to be here this morning. 5 years ago, my brother Charles and I provided the funds to start the Americans for Prosperity. And it's beyond my wildest dreams how AFP has grown into this enormous organization of hundreds of thousands of American citizens.
Charles Koch, particularly in the 2000s, began to build up a large donor network. So he has people who share his political commitments and his goals. The last time I checked, there were almost 700 of these donors giving a minimum of $100,000 a year. And they support the development of the Tea Party groups around the country and try to harness those Tea Party groups to be the kind of popular ground troops that they had lacked to move this agenda.
Marx, Lenin, and Stalin light. That's what we have in Washington right now.
Koch provided buses for them to travel, to get to events, to shout down Democratic members.
This alliance between these right-wing libertarians and the Tea Party movement increased the political power of the radical right. Their once marginal ideas were now more popular, and not just with Republican voters. The radical wing of the Republican Party recognized the potential in this dynamic and decided to channel voters' anger to win the 2010 midterm elections.
So by the 2010 midterms, you had an army of conservatives, Republicans who were organizing, mobilizing, and they were ready to take back the House of Representatives. They were ready to try to take back the Senate. And they were playing on all these fears, all this kind of anger. And they were arguing a lot like Gingrich in the 80s that this party is not going far enough, that they have to be more extreme in what they stood for and what they did to achieve those goals. And so a lot of them win office in 2010. They take the House back.
You don't always pay much attention to this, but there's been a dramatic change in who represents the Republican Party in Congress since 2010. 2010 was the first Tea Party election. It was a big, very successful election for the Republicans, and brought in a slew of new leaders who identified, in some cases explicitly, with the Tea Party.
These new leaders who emerged from the Tea Party movement entered Congress in 2011. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio were among those who accelerated the Republicans' transformation into a populist party. While Reagan's GOP was still open to immigration, free trade, and government intervention, the new Republicans were increasingly isolationist and anti-immigration. The hardliners among them found a mighty mouthpiece to spread their ideas: conservative cable TV channel Fox News.
Fox News is very important to this change that we see in the Republican Party and ultimately to Donald Trump. I mean, the platform is the platform. This is a way to communicate outside the channels of the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and all of that, and take their arguments directly to Republican voters.
You know, there's little question in my mind that but for Fox News, we would not have had Trump. Because you couldn't have elected somebody who lied that often. Fox News really created the idea of fake news by saying we're fair and balanced and the other networks are giving you fake news. And over time, a lot of people wanted to believe it, so they did believe it.
One of the most infamous examples of fake news was propagated in the 2010s by what was known as the birther movement. Birthers, many of whom were also Tea Party supporters, cast public doubt on whether then-President Barack Obama was born on U.S. soil. In doing so, they indirectly questioned the legitimacy of Obama's presidency.
The idea that Barack Obama wasn't born in this country was never plausible, never credible. It was always some sort of, right-wing fever dream. And rather than report on it, Fox encouraged it. And they encouraged it partly by having Donald Trump.
It's time to turn to Donald Trump, who joins us every Monday at this time. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Why can't he produce a birth certificate? And by the way, there's one story that his family doesn't even know what hospital he was born in.
Donald Trump, welcome back. It's Monday. It's time for you.
These are people that want to see a birth certificate. They want to know that the president was born here. The fact is, if you're not born in the United States, you cannot be president.
Trump was good TV. He was entertaining. He was willing to say, wild things that got people all worked up.
Because Donald Trump's embrace of the birther movement signaled to the Tea Party that he was their guy and embraced some of the most radical anti-system, anti-establishment ideas, and he became the darling of the Tea Party base.
The birther lie proved so convincing that in 2011, almost 40% of Republicans believed that Barack Obama was not a natural-born U.S. citizen, forcing the president to provide proof.
I have to say that over the last 2.5 years, I have watched with bemusement. I've been puzzled at the degree to which this thing just kept on going. We've had every official in Hawaii confirm that, yes, in fact, I was born in Hawaii, August 4th, 1961, in Kapiolani Hospital. We've posted the certification that is given by the state of Hawaii. We got big problems to solve, and I'm confident we can solve them, but we're going to have to focus on them, not on this. Thanks very much, everybody.
In terms of how the Obama team reacted to the birther ideas and Trump at that point, but my impression, both from friends and from the outside, was they didn't take it seriously. Why should they? It was absurd. This actually has, I think, been a problem for Democrats, is that the Democrats tend to believe the truth will bear out, that if you do good things, good policies or good politics, things sell themselves. The thing about Trump, and I think some other Republican politicians Gingrich understood, is sales matters, marketing matters, branding matters. Policy doesn't matter at all.
Donald Trump. Good morning to you, Donald.
Good morning.
So I thought that you might be interested in this.
Fox News gave Trump the political legitimacy he'd been missing and made him appear trustworthy in the eyes of Republican voters. The ultra-right developed their brand and found their news network just in time for the 2016 presidential election. And they had an army of radicalized voters and lawmakers all ready to go. During the Republican presidential primaries, a path was cleared for the man who was in the right place at the right time.
Trump comes in 2016, and it's also a very crowded field, and he's different from all the rest. He's not a politician. He's a loud guy, a mouth. He says whatever's on his mind.
The weakest person on the stage by far on illegal immigration is Jeb Bush. They come out of an act of love, whether you like it or not. He is so weak on illegal immigration, it's laughable, and everybody knows it.
I was offended by it. I thought all these things that he would say about other candidates on the stage were inappropriate. And he was pretty much shattering all those norms. But people ate it up. They seemed to like it.
Republicans didn't see Trump coming. They thought he was a buffoon. They thought he was a joke. And they completely underestimated him.
I'm going to bring jobs back from Mexico and from Japan, where they're all, every country throughout the world. We have to make our economy grow again. We're dying. This country is dying, and our workers are losing their jobs.
And this was a time when a lot of people, particularly rural Americans, working class Americans that felt that they'd been abandoned by both parties, started to really identify with Trump.
He weaponizes, in some ways, the divisions in American society. Division works for him. He wants to increase polarization because that's how he sees his success.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Donald John Trump.
"30 years after Newt Gingrich set the course, the populist ultra-right reached the White House. Donald Trump understood the direction in which the Republican Party was headed and seized the opportunity. And the right found in him the populist leader they'd been missing.
Everyone hoped that now that he was president, he would try and become, if not a unifier, then someone who wouldn't pour salt in all the wounds. Why we ever thought that was possible, I don't know. Very quickly, he took a salt mine and poured it on the wounds in America. And Charlottesville was the first super clear indication of what was to come, what was going to happen.
During Donald Trump's first term, Charlottesville, Virginia was rocked by extremist violence, a highly visible sign of the changes that occurred since the radical right's election victory. In August 2017, white supremacists gathered here for the Unite the Right rally to protest the removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
I've been here 53 years. It was the most horrible night that I've lived in Charlottesville, no question about it. This was a Friday, and I live in one of Jefferson's pavilions on the lawn. They walked through the university grounds and came from the back through the lawn. They all had tiki torches. It was clearly meant to imitate the German Nazi marches from the 1930s in Germany. That's what it was really designed to do. And it was as frightening as those marchers because these young men, and they were all men that I saw, and they were in their 20s and 30s. They had contorted faces, contorted with hatred.
Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets!
They were shouting horrible things like Nazi slogans and Jews will not replace us.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
And one of them was shouting, "Into the ovens."
The next day, at the Unite the Right rally, there were clashes between counter-protesters and radical rights supporters. Former Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke was also present.
I believe that today in Charlottesville, this is a first step toward making a realization of something that Trump alluded to earlier in the campaign, which is this is the first step toward taking America back.
The rally ended when a car plowed into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing one and injuring 19 others. Anyone who thought President Trump would condemn the violence was sorely mistaken.
Excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. Thank you. Thank you.
Then he can't quite help himself, and he equivocates and says there's good people on both sides. There are very fine people on both sides. No question that the people who are at the most extreme edges of American society heard what Trump was saying. And what he was saying was to them is, I hear you. You're part of my coalition. I'm with you. And they never heard that from an American president before, not in modern times anyway. It was a signal to the most radical parts of the American life that they were no longer on the fringes, that they had an ear in the White House that was listening to them.
When mainstream politicians, whenever mainstream politicians begin to tolerate, condone, justify, wink at, embrace violent paramilitary groups, democracy's in trouble.
Donald Trump legitimized these radical right militias, gaining their loyalty in return. The events in Charlottesville sparked a period of political chaos in the U.S., which compromised the allegiance of many top Republicans.
Republicans were distraught, really, at Trump's reaction to Charlottesville because it painted them as racists. It put them in bed with people who the party had done what they could to either put on the sidelines or distance themselves from over the years. They criticized him for that, but they didn't break from him. A few months later, they're on they're standing with him at the White House signing the big tax cut.
I can tell you I serve with him every day. President Donald Trump is a man of his word. He's a man of action. And with the strong support of these members of Congress, President Donald Trump delivered a great victory for the American people.
I mean, it's a very transactional view of politics, What you've done is you traded a tax cut for the soul of your party.
They were not willing to risk or sacrifice their own political careers, their own political ambitions, and their political party's electoral success to stop Trump.
By making this pact, the Republicans capitulated to Donald Trump and made no effort to counter his authoritarian impulses. For 4 years, the president violated democratic norms and crossed red lines again and again.
This is a part of who he is. Trump has naturally authoritarian instincts as he sees government. He does not believe in democracy, small d, as it has been practiced in America for 200 and some years.
Please welcome the President, Donald J. Trump!
The most dangerous day of his first term came on January 6, 2021. Refusing to concede to Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential elections, he rallied his supporters to march to the nearby Capitol building and stop Congress from formally certifying the Electoral College votes.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
USA! USA! USA!
If you went over there to the line, if you went
I'd say that the biggest threat to our democracy happened to take place on January 6th, where you had a bunch of people riled up by Donald Trump and his allies around him trying to overturn a free and fair election, going to the United States Capitol and trying to get into the Capitol. We saw people talking about hanging Mike Pence, the vice president. That is unheard of. There's a real threat, a physical threat with American politicians.
Breaking news tonight, the deadly siege on Congress as an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol. We've seen shocking images of chaos, rioters rushing past barricades and police up the Capitol steps.
Most Republican leaders were aghast at the January 6th violence. And for about 1 or 2 days, they stood ready to dispense with Trump. They looked at the polls, they took the temperature, the direction of the wind, and they realized the base was still with Trump. And they were still unwilling to confront him.
He has shown in the past that he can be vindictive and punish the people who opposed him and who, he takes things very personally. And I think there's a certain level of fear out there to oppose him. Yes, no doubt. It's one of the secrets to his power.
Mitt Romney, in his memoirs, wrote about something that other retired Republicans have told me, which is that many Republican politicians don't oppose Trump out of political cowardice. They do it out of physical fear. They literally worry what will happen to their families, to their kids, to their partners if they earn the ire of the Republican base. You know, there are elements of 1920s and 1930s Europe that are recognizable today in the U.S. in the right-wing base in the United States.
Under Trump, the GOP went from being the party of law and order to an insurrectionist party. Still, most Republican presidential candidates overlooked Trump's anti-democratic behavior.
If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
In an increasingly divided country, the Republicans stood united behind Donald Trump in the 2024 election. Largely rural red states are firmly in Republican hands, whereas most U.S. coastal states and big cities are Democrat strongholds. The two parties seem so far apart that some on the far right are bringing up ideas of secession. Like Daniel Miller, president of the Texas Nationalist Movement.
The bombshell came last summer when Survey USA released the results of a poll that they had done in Texas. What it showed was that 60% of Texas voters, 66% of likely voters would vote for Texas independence if they were given an opportunity. There was always this sentiment, and I think it's latent among Texans, that there is a major disconnect between the people of Texas and the federal system. You know, Washington, D.C., in their minds is a government that is far away, but has far too much intrusion into their lives.
I think I overdressed. Where's the camo? That relegated us from being a state to being merely an administrative province of an out-of-control system in D.C. Yeah. We are the real Texans. We are the people. Yeah! This rally is not an end. This rally is just the beginning. Yeah. For some of us, it is the middle of the journey. But from this day forward, let the people, the would-be tyrants in the parliament, let them be on notice that we will not stop, we will not back down until we see Texas free and independent.
Calls for a Texit are growing. In 2022, the Republican Party of Texas demanded a referendum on independence in their election manifesto for the very first time.
Texas retains the right to secede from the United States, and the Texas legislature should be called upon to pass a referendum consistent thereto.
Other U.S. states like Illinois and Oregon are increasingly toying with secessionist ideas as well. Even at the national level, some are advocating for a split. Like David Reboy. He's a strategist at the Claremont Institute, a far-right think tank which fosters the intellectual base for Trumpism.
The New York Times says the Claremont Institute is, the most influential think tank on the right. A few years ago, I wrote a piece called "National Divorce is Expensive, but it's Worth Every Penny." I believe national divorce, or to be more explicit, the breakup of the United States, is inevitable. It's just a matter of the timeline. It's not going to be tomorrow, it's not going to be next year, but at some point, all human things fade away.
More than anything else, it is a reminder for Red America to think about economic and cultural autonomy for itself and what it would take to get there.
America's unbelievably polarized. I mean, I don't think there is very much that unites the left and right in America in terms of first principles. I do think that we're in the middle of a cold civil war. We are in an ideological conflict. It's an open question on what vision of the world will ultimately prevail. The left's understanding of the world or the right's understanding of the world. Marjorie Taylor Greene and some other politicians too decided to pick it up.
And in 2022, I'm going to blow away the Democrat socialist agenda.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the most high-profile Republican hardliners in the House of Representatives.
We need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government.
Last thing I ever want to see in America is a civil war. No one wants that. At least everyone I know would never want that. But it's going that direction, and we have to do something about it.
If Democrat voters choose to flee these blue states, well, once they move to a red state, guess what? Maybe you don't get to vote for 5 years. You can live there, you can work there, but you don't get to bring your values.
Currently, I don't think the threat of secession is too serious, but I think what it speaks to is this idea that right-wing infotainment media, right-wing politicians have found that this is an issue that can stoke resentment within the base, and it's something that voters are responding to. So I think that's problematic.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Matt Gaetz emerged as the faces of the MAGA movement in the House of Representatives. These ardent Trump supporters became figureheads of the new Republican right. They blocked votes on the federal budget and raising the debt ceiling. They also threatened to block aid to Ukraine.
I'm here as a member of the House Armed Services Committee to say that the days of endless cash and military materiel to Ukraine are numbered.
When the dominant party in the House of Representatives is hostage to a faction that wants to block everything, and therefore nothing can get done, it's going to affect the American economy. It's going to affect American power in the world, prestige and power in the world. It could, in a matter of days, affect our ability to supply Ukraine, which is not a small thing.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
What is the aim of these radicals? I think their behavior, it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that that the radical wing of the Republican Party, that the MAGA wing of the Republican Party has become nihilist. They want to bring the system down.
Disruption is the goal. Chaos is the goal. They want to, it's a wrecking crew, as one of my colleagues wrote. It doesn't have a goal like, if only I could reduce the deficit by so many billions of dollars, or if I could get this policy in place. It's not policy driven. The policies are almost a secondary element to it. It is just about the notion of blowing up the system, on the theory that the system has been broken for so long, on the theory that breaking it up in and of itself is the goal.
In just 40 years, the U.S. radical right has gone from the fringes to the center of political life. They've seized control of the levers of power and now flex their might in politics, the judiciary, and the media. Donald Trump has accelerated this process. With his help, they've wrested control of the Supreme Court and tipped the scales in their favor in Congress. On November 5th, 2024, Trump was elected president for a second time. The Republicans also retained control of the House and took back the Senate. A big win that gave a huge boost to the ultra-right, making them more powerful than ever before.